Maria was a simple woman with a heart full of kindness. She lived in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other. Her life was peaceful, full of small routines that gave her comfort. Every morning she would wake up early, make tea for herself, and feed the birds that gathered outside her small garden. She didn't have expensive clothes or jewelry, but she had something far more valuable: respect and love from the people around her. She was the kind of woman who would stop to help a stranger on the road, share food with a hungry child, or listen to a neighbor's problems with patience. Her smile was gentle, and her words always carried warmth. No one could ever imagine that behind her calm and humble nature was a story that would one day shake an entire courtroom. Maria was married to a man named Ayan Mera. He was one of the most respected judges in the Supreme Court. But very few people in her town knew this. Maria never liked to show off her husband's status or power. She believed that people should respect her for who she was, not for who her husband was. Even when Ayan suggested moving to a bigger city or living in a fancy house, Maria preferred their small, cozy home. She believed happiness wasn't about luxury. It was about peace and honesty. Every evening, she would walk to the market to buy vegetables, talk to the shopkeepers, and help the poor families who couldn't afford food. She was well educated, but she dressed simply, always wearing soft cotton saris and carrying an old leather purse. Many people mistook her simplicity for weakness, but those who knew her well understood that she was strong in ways that few could see. Maria's husband, Ayan, admired her deeply. Despite being a powerful man, he often said that his wife's humility kept him grounded. Whenever he faced a difficult case in court, he would think about what Maria would do, and her sense of fairness often guided him to make the right decision. Their relationship was built on trust and quiet respect. They didn't need grand gestures. A single look or a smile between them spoke volumes. One of Maria's favorite places was the small temple near her house. Every Sunday she went there early in the morning, not to ask for anything, but to thank God for the life she had. She prayed for others more than for herself, for the sick, the poor, and even for people who had wronged her. That was her nature. She believed that kindness had the power to change even the hardest of hearts. Children in the neighborhood loved her. They often ran to her house after school because they knew she would have homemade sweets waiting for them. She listened to their stories with interest, clapping when they shared their small achievements. To them, she wasn't just Auntie Maria. She was like family. But even in her calm and simple life, Maria faced her share of challenges. Sometimes people took advantage of her kindness. Some neighbors gossiped about her modest lifestyle, wondering why the wife of such a powerful man lived so plainly. Maria never responded to their words. She believed that a person's worth wasn't in how much they owned, but in how they treated others. There was something about her that inspired quiet respect. Even those who mocked her simplicity couldn't deny the peace she carried within her. She never raised her voice, never argued. But when she spoke, her words carried truth and sincerity that touched people deeply. What made Maria truly remarkable was her courage. She wasn't the kind of person who would fight with anger. She fought with dignity. She believed that strength wasn't in shouting or showing power, but in standing firm for what's right, even when no one else does. Her days were calm, filled with ordinary moments that made her happy. Making tea, reading books, helping a friend, or writing letters to her husband when he was away for work. She didn't know that her peaceful life was about to take a turn that would test her strength, her patience, and her faith in justice. People often say that life tests the kindest souls the hardest. Maria's test was coming soon, and it would come in a way she never expected. One ordinary morning would change everything. The same calm eyes that once looked at the world with kindness would soon face humiliation in a courtroom. The same gentle voice that spoke softly to everyone would soon speak words that silenced an entire hall. But that day hadn't arrived yet. For now, Maria continued to live her life with simplicity and grace. She had no idea that her next trip to the city would make her the center of a shocking story, one that would remind the world that true power doesn't come from status, money, or position. It comes from truth, integrity, and quiet strength. In her heart, Maria carried a wisdom that no university could teach and no courtroom could measure. She believed that justice was not just about laws. It was about doing what is right even when it's hard. And soon, she would prove that belief in a way no one could ever forget. The sun was shining brightly that morning, and Maria decided to go to the city to finish some small errands. She wanted to renew her identification papers and buy a few household items before her husband returned from his official trip. Like always, she wore a simple cotton sari, tied her hair neatly, and carried her old leather purse. She took the early bus to the city, sitting quietly by the window, watching the fields and small houses pass by. The city was busier than usual. Horns honked, people rushed everywhere, and the streets were crowded. Maria walked to the government office where she needed to get her documents verified. It was an old building, dusty floors, long lines, and impatient voices echoing through the halls. But Maria wasn't the kind of person to complain. She took her place in line, patiently waiting her turn, holding her file close to her chest. After almost an hour, her number was called. She walked up to the counter where an officer named Mr. Verma sat. He looked annoyed, tapping his pen on the desk. "Next," he shouted. Maria smiled politely and handed him her papers. "Good morning, sir. I've come to renew my ID card." Without even looking up, he snatched the file from her hand. "You people never fill the forms correctly," he grumbled. "Always making mistakes." Maria remained calm. "I believe everything is filled correctly, sir. I double-checked it before coming." But Mr. Verma wasn't listening. He glanced at her clothes and old purse and immediately judged her as someone who could be easily pushed around. "Go make a photocopy of this and bring it back," he said sharply, tossing one page at her. Maria nodded and walked toward the photocopy shop outside the building. When she returned a few minutes later, something strange was happening. People were gathered around the counter whispering. Mr. Verma stood behind his desk looking angry and shouting. "There was money in my drawer. Who took it?" he yelled, pointing at the empty cash slot. "Someone has stolen 2,000 rupees. Maria froze. She didn't understand what was happening. She had only stepped out for a few minutes. The guard looked around. "Sir, who was here when it happened?" Mr. Verma pointed straight at Maria. "She was here. This woman was the last person standing at my desk before I noticed the money missing." Maria's eyes widened in shock. "Me? No, sir. I didn't take anything." The officer banged his hand on the desk. "Don't lie. You think you can come here, pretend to be innocent, and steal government money? Guards, don't let her leave." Within seconds, people started whispering. Some stared at Maria with suspicion. Others stepped away from her as if she were guilty. Her heart pounded. "Please believe me," she pleaded. "I didn't do anything wrong. I only went out to make a photocopy, but no one listened." The guards grabbed her arm and led her to a small office. The humiliation was unbearable. Her eyes filled with tears, not because of fear, but because of how easily people had believed a lie. After some time, a police officer arrived. He spoke to Mr. Verma and then turned to Maria. "Madam, we've received a theft complaint. You need to come with us for questioning." Maria tried to explain. "Officer, I didn't steal. I have never taken anything that doesn't belong to me. You can search my bag, my purse, anything." They searched everything, and her purse, her documents, even her clothes, but found nothing. Still, Mr. Verma insisted that she was guilty. She must have hidden the money somewhere. "These people are clever," he said loudly, trying to convince everyone of his lie. The police, unsure what to do, took her to the local station. Maria sat there silently, her hands shaking slightly, her mind numb. For the first time in her life, she felt truly helpless. She thought of her husband, Ayan, but didn't want to disturb him while he was working. She believed that truth always came out, that honesty would protect her. Hours passed, and the case quickly became gossip around the city office. Some employees felt pity while others mocked her. "Such a simple-looking woman," one whispered. "Who would have thought she could steal?" When the news reached the district court, a hearing was arranged for the next day. The case would be handled by Judge Rana, a man with a short temper and a sharp tongue. He was known for judging people by their appearance, not by facts. That night, Maria sat alone in the police station's small waiting room. She prayed quietly, tears falling down her cheeks. "God, I've done nothing wrong," she whispered. "Please give me strength to face tomorrow." The constable watching her felt uneasy. He had seen real criminals, liars, thieves, and smugglers. But this woman looked different. There was honesty in her eyes and peace in her voice. Still, the system had its rules, and she had to appear before the judge. When the morning came, the courtroom was full. Some came out of curiosity, others to mock. Maria stood before the judge dressed in the same simple sari, her head slightly bowed. She looked like a woman carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. And across from her sat Judge Rana, staring down with arrogance, ready to decide her fate, without knowing that the woman he was about to humiliate was the wife of the Supreme Court judge himself. But that truth was yet to unfold. For now, Maria's story was just beginning. A story of injustice, courage, and the moment when truth would roar louder than power. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as people filled the wooden benches. Some came because they knew the accused woman. Others came out of curiosity. It was a small town, and gossip spread faster than truth. Maria stood quietly near the front, her hands clasped tightly together. Her eyes were calm, though her heart was heavy. Then the sound of footsteps echoed. Everyone turned as Judge Rana entered. He was a tall man in his late 50s, known for his pride and sharp tongue. His robe flowed behind him like a symbol of his power. He didn't just walk, he commanded attention. He believed that when he entered a courtroom, even truth should stand up to greet him. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at the papers in front of him. Without lifting his eyes, he said coldly, "What's the case?" The clerk spoke quickly. "Your Honor, it's a theft case. The accused, Maria Mehra, is charged with stealing money from a government officer's drawer." Judge Rana leaned back in his chair and finally looked at Maria. His expression showed instant judgment. Her simple sorry, her calm face, her modest appearance. Everything about her seemed ordinary to him. He didn't see honesty. He saw weakness. "So," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "you thought you could walk into a government office and steal money? A clever trick for someone who looks so innocent." Maria opened her mouth to speak, but the judge cut her off. "Don't speak unless I ask you to. I've seen hundreds like you." Quiet faces, gentle voices, all pretending to be innocent until caught. The people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at Maria with pity. Others nodded, agreeing with the judge. The officer, Mr. Verma, stood confidently, pretending to look hurt. "Your Honor, I trusted her. I didn't even think she could do such a thing. But when I turned around, the money was gone," he said dramatically. Judge Rana nodded as if the case was already solved. And you, woman, what do you have to say for yourself?" Maria looked up slowly, her voice trembling but steady. "Your Honor, I didn't steal anything. I went out to make a photocopy. When I returned, he accused me without proof. They searched me, but they found nothing." Rana smirked. "Thieves don't always keep the money in their pockets. They hide it somewhere clever. You people always have excuses." His words cut through the air like knives. Maria felt a lump form in her throat, but she refused to cry. She had done nothing wrong, and she wouldn't let humiliation break her spirit. "Do you have a lawyer?" the judge asked, glancing at her file. Maria shook her head. "No, Your Honor, I didn't have time to arrange one." "Of course you didn't," he said mockingly. "You didn't think you'd get caught, did you?" The courtroom chuckled quietly. The judge's arrogance filled the room, suffocating any sense of fairness. To him, this wasn't about truth. It was about power. As the hearing went on, Maria stood still, listening to false statements and twisted stories. The officer exaggerated every word, and the judge nodded as if he already knew the ending. When the clerk handed him the file again, Rana said, "I've seen enough. It's a simple case. The evidence may be missing, but sometimes Your Honor's judgment is enough." Maria's heart sank. Was this what justice had become? A man's pride deciding right and wrong? Just then she took a slow breath and spoke softly. "Your Honor, may I say one thing before you give your judgment?" Judge Rana leaned back, clearly irritated. "Fine, you have 1 minute. But don't waste my time," Maria nodded gently. "Thank you, sir. I just want one phone call, not to escape, not to plead, just one call to someone who can help prove the truth." The judge laughed, shaking his head. "You think this is a movie? Fine, make your phone call. It won't change the fact that you're guilty." The courtroom murmured again, curious about who she would call. Maria pulled out her phone with trembling hands. She dialed a number and spoke in a calm, soft voice. "Hello, dear. I'm at the district court. I think you should come here." There was silence for a few seconds. Then she said, "Yes, it's important." She ended the call, her eyes steady, her face peaceful. The judge raised an eyebrow. "And who is this savior you've called? A lawyer? A friend who will lie for you?" Maria smiled faintly. "No, Your Honor, my husband." "Your husband?" He repeated mockingly. What does he do? Work at a shop? Or maybe he's another troublemaker like you? Maria didn't reply. She just looked down, quietly whispering a prayer. Judge Rana shook his head and said, Fine. We'll wait for your husband, but don't expect miracles. Justice doesn't bend for anyone. He had no idea that those words would soon come back to haunt him. The same arrogance that made him mock an innocent woman would soon make him bow his head in shame. Outside the court, the sound of sirens began to approach. Uniformed guards moved quickly, making way for someone important. Inside, people whispered, wondering who could be arriving with such authority. And Maria, still standing quietly, knew that the moment of truth was finally walking through those doors. The judge was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. That power doesn't come from a black robe or a wooden hammer. It comes from integrity, truth, and humility. The courtroom grew silent after Maria's phone call. Everyone waited curiously, whispering among themselves. Some mocked her, others pitied her. But Maria stood still, calm, patient, and composed, as if she already knew that truth didn't need to shout to be heard. Judge Rana tapped his pen impatiently. So, Mrs. Mehra, are we waiting for your husband to rescue you from justice? You think this court runs on emotions? He said, his voice sharp and sarcastic. Maria looked up, her eyes steady. No, Your Honor. I believe this court runs on truth. That's why I'm not afraid. Her words, simple yet powerful, made a few people in the courtroom turn their heads. They could see something different in her now, something strong hidden behind her quiet nature. Minutes turned into hours. The judge grew more restless. This is wasting the court's time, he said angrily. I don't have all day to wait for someone's husband. We'll resume the judgment. But Maria didn't argue. She didn't beg or cry. She simply folded her hands and said, Please, sir, just a few more minutes. Her voice was soft, but there was a firmness in it that even Judge Rana couldn't completely ignore. He sighed loudly and leaned back in his chair. Fine, but this will not change the verdict, he muttered. As everyone waited, Maria's mind wandered to her husband, Ayan. She remembered his calm face, his deep voice that always spoke with reason, and his words that had guided her so many times before. When truth is on your side, silence becomes your loudest strength. She smiled faintly at the memory. It was true. All her life she had believed that patience and kindness were not weaknesses. They were forms of strength. And today, she would hold on to them more tightly than ever. The officer who had accused her, Mr. Verma, kept glancing at the clock nervously. He had hoped the case would end quickly. The longer it went on, the more uncomfortable he became. He could feel eyes watching him, questioning his story. His confidence was slipping little by little. Maria noticed it. She didn't say a word, but her silence spoke louder than anything else. It made him uneasy. Her calmness was something he couldn't understand. He had expected fear, anger, or tears, but what he saw instead was peace, and that peace scared him. Finally, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the courtroom. The murmurs grew louder. The guards at the door straightened up. Someone important was arriving. But before anyone entered, Judge Rana stood up in irritation. Enough of this drama, he said loudly. This court will not be turned into a waiting room. The accused has failed to prove her innocence. I hereby... He stopped mid-sentence as the doors swung open. A man in a black suit walked in, tall, dignified, and confident. His presence commanded instant respect. The guards saluted without hesitation. People began whispering, their voices trembling with surprise. Judge Rana frowned, confused by the sudden reaction. Who is this? Why is everyone standing? The clerk hurriedly whispered, Sir, that's Justice Ayan Mehra. From the Supreme Court, Rana's face turned pale. The same man he had heard of. A name that symbolized truth, fairness, and integrity, was now walking straight toward him, Maria's husband. Justice Mehra's eyes were calm, but there was a quiet fire in them. He didn't shout or accuse. He simply walked to his wife, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's all right, he said softly. I'm here now. The entire courtroom was silent. The same woman who was mocked for her simplicity now stood beside one of the most powerful and respected men in the country. Judge Rana cleared his throat nervously. Justice Mehra, I didn't know you were connected to this case. Ayan raised his hand politely. I'm not here for formalities, Judge Rana. I'm here for truth. May I see the case file? Without waiting for an answer, he took the file from the clerk and read through it quickly. The silence in the room was heavy. Only the faint rustling of papers could be heard. When he finished, he looked up. There is no evidence, no proof. Only an accusation from an officer who clearly failed to provide any witness or security footage. How could you, Judge Rana, even consider passing a verdict based on assumptions? Rana tried to speak, but his voice failed him. I was going to verify further. No, Ayan interrupted calmly. You were going to condemn an innocent woman based on how she looked. You saw her simplicity as weakness. But let me remind you, Judge Rana, the first duty of a judge is not to show power. It is to seek truth. His words struck the courtroom like thunder. The officer, Mr. Verma, began sweating. Ayan turned to him next. You accused my wife to hide your own corruption. You will now face the consequences. The guards immediately stepped forward and took Verma into custody. The truth had finally spoken, not through loud words or anger, but through calm strength and quiet justice. Maria didn't smile or celebrate. She simply looked down, whispering a silent thank you to God. Her eyes glistened, not with pride, but with relief. Judge Rana stood frozen, unable to meet her gaze. He realized at that moment that the woman he had mocked had taught him more about justice than all his years in court. And as the couple walked out of the courtroom hand in hand, everyone watched in awe. They didn't just see a powerful judge and his wife. They saw what true strength looked like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't proud. It was silent, calm, and unbreakable. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway before the door creaked open again. Every head in the courtroom turned toward the entrance. The tension was so thick that even the air seemed to hold its breath. Maria stood silently, her hands folded in front of her, her expression calm but unreadable. The judge, still seated with forced confidence, tapped his pen nervously on the wooden bench. He tried to hide his unease, but his shaking fingers gave him away, and then he walked in. Justice Ayan Mehra, her husband, entered the courtroom with quiet authority. His black coat was spotless, his stride steady, and his face calm yet intense. He wasn't a man who needed to speak loudly to be heard. His presence alone demanded respect. The guard straightened immediately. The murmurs stopped, and even Judge Rana fell silent for a moment. Maria turned her head slightly and met her husband's eyes. There was no fear in her gaze, and only relief and faith. A small smile flickered across her lips, the kind of smile that comes from knowing that truth has finally arrived. Ayan walked directly toward her, ignoring the eyes that followed him. He placed his briefcase on the table, looked at her gently, and said, "You did the right thing, Maria." Judge Rana stood up awkwardly. "Justice Mehra, what an unexpected visit. I didn't know you were involved in this matter." Ayan looked at him calmly. "You weren't supposed to know. Because if you had known, you might have treated this case differently." His tone was polite but sharp. Every word carried weight. The judge swallowed hard. "I heard my wife was accused of theft," Ayan continued, his voice steady but cold. "Before I came here, I reviewed the case file from the police station. I found no witness statements, no camera footage, and no recovery of stolen money. Yet she was almost declared guilty. On what grounds?" Judge Rana opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked down at his desk, suddenly aware of how flimsy his authority seemed before the real weight of justice. Ayan turned to the officer, Mr. Verma, who stood in the corner, pale and trembling. "You filed the complaint?" he asked. "Yes." "Yes, sir," Verma stuttered. "She was the last person near my desk before the money went missing." Ayan raised a hand to stop him. "So you assumed she stole it?" Verma hesitated. "Sir, I thought, you thought?" Ayan interrupted sharply. "Justice cannot run on thoughts and guesses, Mr. Verma. You've damaged an innocent woman's dignity because of your own carelessness. Or perhaps your guilt?" The officer's face turned red. "No, sir. I didn't." Before he could finish, one of the clerks spoke up hesitantly. "Sir, I think there was a cleaner who saw something that day." "But no one asked her." Ayan's eyes narrowed. "Bring her here." Within minutes, the cleaner, a thin, nervous womanite, was brought into the courtroom. She looked frightened, glancing at everyone. I didn't want trouble, sir," she said softly. "But I saw Mr. Verma take the money from the drawer before lunch. He said he needed to keep it safe." A gasp filled the courtroom. Mr. Verma's face turned white. Judge Rana looked stunned. Ayan nodded slowly. So the truth was here all along. It just needed courage to speak. He looked at Maria with pride. And my wife never lost her courage. The officer tried to protest, but the evidence was clear. The cleaner's testimony, along with the lack of proof against Maria, destroyed his story completely. Guards, Ayan said calmly, take Mr. Verma into custody for filing a false case and attempting to defame an innocent citizen. The guard stepped forward immediately. Verma begged, Sir, please. I was just afraid. I didn't mean, but it was too late. The same system he had tried to manipulate was now turning against him. Ayan then turned to Judge Rana, who sat frozen in his chair. Justice Rana, he said quietly, a courtroom is not a place for pride. It is a temple of truth. You were about to punish an innocent woman because you saw her simplicity as weakness. Do you realize what kind of injustice that would have been? The judge looked down, ashamed. I was wrong, Justice Mera. I misjudged her. I misjudged everything. Maria finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. Sir, we all make mistakes, but what matters is whether we learn from them. Her words struck deeper than any reprimand. The same woman who had been insulted and mocked was now showing grace to the man who had humiliated her. The courtroom was silent, not out of fear, but out of awe. Everyone watched her, realizing that real strength doesn't need power or position. It comes from character. Judge Rana slowly stood up. Mrs. Mera, he said softly, you've taught me something today that years of service never could. I am deeply sorry, Maria smiled gently. Apology accepted, Your Honor. Let's make sure no one else has to face what I did. As she and Ayan walked out of the courtroom together, people moved aside respectfully. Even those who had doubted her earlier lowered their heads in shame. Outside, the sun was shining brightly again. The air felt lighter, freer, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath after holding it for too long. Ayan looked at his wife with a small smile. You stayed calm through it all, he said quietly. Maria replied, I had faith that truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs time. And in that moment, the words hung in the air. Simple, honest, and eternal, because indeed, one phone call had changed everything. The courtroom that had been buzzing with judgment and gossip was now silent. So silent that even the sound of a pen dropping could be heard. The truth had finally come out, and it hit harder than anyone could have imagined. Maria stood quietly beside her husband, Justice Ayan Mera, as the police led Mr. Verma away in handcuffs. The same officer who had once shouted and accused her now kept his eyes fixed on the floor, too ashamed to look up. His confidence had vanished, replaced by fear and regret. Judge Rana sat frozen in his chair, his hands trembling slightly. His face was pale, his pride shattered. The courtroom that had once obeyed his every word was now filled with whispers of disbelief. He had humiliated an innocent woman, mocked her simplicity, and almost ruined her life, all because he thought power gave him the right to assume. Justice Mera turned to the judge, his voice calm but firm. Judge Rana, he began, this could have ended differently. You could have sent my wife to prison today, not because she was guilty, but because you were impatient. Justice delayed is bad, but justice decided without truth is worse. The judge swallowed hard. Justice Mera, I don't know what to say. I made a terrible mistake. Maria looked at him kindly. Sir, we all make mistakes, she said softly. But power should never silence compassion. When you look at someone, don't judge them by their clothes or by how simple they appear. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. Her words filled the courtroom like sunlight breaking through clouds. Even the clerk standing by the wall wiped his eyes. There was something in her tone, not anger, not revenge, but forgiveness. It was the kind of grace only a truly strong person could show. The judge took off his glasses and sighed deeply. Mrs. Mera, he said, his voice shaking, I judged you before hearing you. I forgot what justice means. I am deeply sorry, Maria nodded. Apologies don't erase the past, Your Honor, but they can begin to build a better future. Ayan placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, proud of her strength. This case will serve as a reminder, he said firmly. A reminder that every judge, every officer, and every person wearing a uniform must remember, no one is above truth. He turned to the court reporter. Record my statement. An internal review will be held for this case. and disciplinary action will be recommended against all who mishandled it." The judge lowered his head. He knew it was deserved, but more than the fear of punishment, what hurt him most was the disappointment in his own heart. For years he had been proud of being a judge. Today, for the first time, he realized that true justice wasn't about sitting higher than others. It was about seeing deeper than others. As Ayan and Maria walked out of the courtroom, people stood up. No one asked them to, they just did. It was a silent gesture of respect, one that said more than words ever could. Even those who had doubted Maria earlier now looked at her with admiration. Outside, the air felt different. The sun was brighter, the wind softer. It was as if nature itself was celebrating truth's victory. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. "It's finally over," she whispered. Ayan smiled faintly. "Yes, but this story will travel far. People will talk about what happened here, and maybe it will make others think twice before misusing power." She looked at him lovingly. "If it teaches even one person to judge less and understand more, then it was worth it." Ayan squeezed her hand gently. "You were brave, Maria. Braver than most people I've seen in court. You didn't fight with anger, you fought with dignity. That's rare." Maria smiled, her eyes glistening. "You once told me that truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs time. You were right. Today, time gave truth its voice." They walked slowly toward their car, side by side, not as a Supreme Court judge and his wife, but as two ordinary souls who had faced the storm together and come out stronger. Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, Judge Rana sat alone long after everyone had left. The walls around him felt heavier than before. He looked at the empty chair where Maria had stood, remembering her calm eyes and steady voice. For the first time he felt small, not because someone else had more power, but because someone else had more grace. He whispered to himself, "I wore the robe of justice." But she carried the spirit of it. That evening, news of the incident spread everywhere. Newspapers carried headlines about the woman who silenced the court with truth. People across the city talked about her courage, her calmness, and how a single phone call had changed everything. But for Maria, it wasn't about fame or victory. She didn't care about headlines. She only cared that justice had been done, not just for her, but for what was right. As the day came to an end, she stood on her balcony, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of gold and orange. The world seemed peaceful again. She whispered softly, "Thank you, God, for giving me strength when I needed it most." And somewhere in the quiet hum of the evening breeze, it felt like the world whispered back, "Truth always wins." The morning after the court case, the city felt different. It was quieter, as if even the streets were still thinking about what had happened. The story of Maria Mera, the simple woman who stood against arrogance, had already spread across newspapers, television, and social media. Headlines spoke of truth triumphs over pride, and Supreme Court judge's wife teaches a lesson in humility. But Maria didn't wake up feeling like a hero. She woke up the same way she always did, with peace in her heart and gratitude in her prayers. As the first rays of sunlight entered her small home, she stood near the window holding her cup of tea, watching the morning sky turn from pink to gold. Her husband, Justice Ayan Mera, walked in, adjusting his coat as he prepared to leave for work. He looked at her with admiration. "Are you ready to be famous?" He joked softly. Maria smiled gently. "Fame doesn't last, Ayan, but lessons do." He nodded. "You're right. Yesterday wasn't just about clearing your name. It was about reminding everyone, and even judges like me, that power must walk hand in hand with humility." Maria placed her cup down and said, "I didn't want to prove anyone wrong. I only wanted to prove that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the voice of truth waiting for the right moment to be heard." Her words lingered in the air, quiet but profound. Ayan kissed her forehead and said, "You've taught more about justice in one day than most of us learn in a lifetime." Later that day, letters and messages started pouring in. Some came from strangers, ordinary people who said her story gave them courage to stand up for themselves. Others came from young lawyers and judges who admitted that her patience had changed the way they saw justice. One letter stood out. It came from Judge Rana. In his neat handwriting he wrote, "Dear Mrs. Mera, you taught me what no courtroom ever did. I realize that the robe I wear doesn't make me just. My heart does. I hope to serve justice with humility from this day forward. Thank you for opening my eyes." Maria smiled as she read the letter. She didn't feel proud, she felt thankful. The same man who once humiliated her had now found his own path toward change. That was the real victory. Days turned into weeks, but the story continued to echo everywhere. Schools used it as an example in moral lessons. Newspapers called it the call that awakened the court. Even people who had never met Maria spoke about her courage and grace. But Maria never sought attention. She returned to her simple life, cooking, helping neighbors, and visiting the small temple near her house every Sunday. The same place where she once prayed for strength now filled her heart with gratitude. One afternoon, while lighting a candle at the temple, a young girl approached her shyly. "Ma'am, are you the lady from the court story?" she asked. Maria smiled warmly. "Yes, dear. But I'm just like you." The girl hesitated. "My mother says I should be like you, brave but calm. She said you didn't shout or fight. You just believed in truth." Maria knelt down and looked into her eyes. "Bravery doesn't always mean shouting, my child. Sometimes it means standing firm even when you're scared. Remember, truth is powerful, but it needs patience." The girl nodded, her eyes shining. "I'll remember that." As Maria watched her leave, she realized that her story had become something bigger than herself. It wasn't just a courtroom victory. It was a message that would keep spreading, one heart at a time. That evening, she and Ayan sat on their balcony as the sun slowly set behind the city skyline. The golden light touched everything, the buildings, the trees, the roads, just as truth had touched every life that heard their story. Ayan broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder why life tested you that way?" Maria thought for a moment. "Maybe because lessons are strongest when they come through pain. I think God wanted to remind people that truth doesn't need status, money, or power. It just needs faith." He smiled softly. "You've changed the meaning of justice for many people, Maria." She looked at him, her voice calm and full of love. "Justice isn't just a decision written on paper. It's how we treat people. It's how we forgive. It's how we stand firm without hatred." The stars began to appear one by one as the city lights flickered on below them. There was a peaceful silence between them. The kind of silence that only exists when both hearts understand each other completely. Maria looked up at the night sky and whispered, "If even one person learns to judge less and understand more, then everything was worth it." A cool breeze brushed her face, carrying with it the soft sounds of life, laughter from nearby homes, temple bells ringing, and somewhere in the distance, a voice calling out in prayer. It felt like the world itself was saying thank you, and from that day on, Maria's story was not just remembered, it was retold, shared, and lived by many. Judges quoted her words, teachers shared her courage, and ordinary people found inspiration in her silence, because sometimes the greatest revolutions begin quietly, not with anger or noise, but with dignity, patience, and faith in what is right. Maria never sought to be remembered as a hero, but in the hearts of everyone who heard her story, she became something far greater, a symbol of truth, grace, and the silent strength that changes the world.